Welcome to the Supervising the CANS webinar. This focus of this webinar will be on different areas in the case planning practice process in which supervisors are required to approve different pieces of work and also to provide worker supervisor. Also to help supervisors gauge what types of things to be looking at and considering when approving different pieces of work and giving feedback to caseworkers.
So the first area that we are going to start with is supervising decision making using CANS actionable items. So as you probably know, caseworkers use the CANS in a lot of different areas as they make decisions throughout the case practice. It's used to determine level of need and level of care, placement decisions, out-of-home care support, foster care rates, identified permanent resource development, case transition staffing, confirming safe environmental health decisions. So now we'll go through each one of those and talk about the caseworker's responsibility and then what your role as a supervisor is in each of these places. So first, speaking about level of need and levels of care, as I said a second ago, caseworkers use the CANS to make decisions for both level of need and level of care, like placement decisions and supporting out-of-home care providers. One instance that you'll see, and you can see on the screen, is the level of need exceeds the level of care. The caseworker has to grant an exception for that, and that's not an exception within the DCF exceptions panel. It's an exception here within the CANS in EWIS-SACWIS. As they grant that exception, they have to describe the resources that they're going to provide to the caregiver to support that placement. And if that's the case, that the level of need exceeds the level of care, EWIS-SACWIS will require completion of this narrative box that you see on the screen. It's called the child provider match. And in that field, the caseworker has to document the appropriateness of the placement, including supports that they will put in place for that provider and the placement itself. In those situations, this is a required field, and the CANS cannot be completed and approved without completing this narrative. So as a supervisor, you're going to want to review this narrative to ensure that the supports are appropriate to meet the needs of the child and the caregiver and to sustain the placement. You'll want to ask the caseworker what they need to put in place to support that provider, what the mismatch is, and what the caseworker can do to ensure that the provider can meet that child's needs. So moving on to foster care rates, the CANS is also used in foster care rate setting to determine the supplemental rate based on items that are rated within the CANS. Moving on now to identified permanent resource. As you probably know, a portion of the CANS is used to rate the identified permanent resource for the child. The actionable items for the identified permanent resource are then used to determine which supports will be necessary to support that resource based on those. So in supervision, you'll want to review the results for the identified permanent resource with the caseworker, as well as what supports that they will be putting in place to assist that person. Moving on to case transition staffing. In case transition staffing, the CANS is used to discuss and orient the new worker to the needs and the strengths of the family. So specifically, the caseworker needs to discuss all the actionable items, those items rated a 2 or a 3, and then anything that has changed recently for that child and that family. So as a supervisor, your role here is to ensure that that case transition staffing and this discussion about the CANS is completed sufficiently. So the next area that we see CANS results being used is in confirming safe environments. So if a caregiver is rated with an actionable item of a 3 with regard to any specific child, this is identified as a placement danger threat. In these situations, the caseworker needs to pursue a new placement for that child and ensure the safety of the other children in the home. So as a supervisor, you should discuss this with your worker regarding any identified placement danger threats and their corresponding plans for those children and those providers. The next area that we see CANS actionable items is in mental health decisions. So part of what the intent of the CANS is to help determine mental health decisions for a child, and the CANS will prompt a caseworker to seek a mental health screen for a child when necessary. So in supervision, you can follow up with your caseworker regarding any mental health needs that are identified by the CANS. And this area that I will cover right now is about case planning. And so we use CANS actionable items to guide our goal writing and our clustering of actionable items. So each actionable item in the CANS should be addressed in a measurable goal, And in order to write those goals, we can cluster actionable items together so that one goal can be used to address multiple actionable items. We would recommend that you look at the webinar that was done in November of 2014 for a more detailed description of clustering items and writing measurable goals. So as a supervisor regarding case planning, you really want to review the case plan with your worker to ensure that all the actionable items on the cans are addressed appropriately in a measurable goal. If they're not all addressed, you want to discuss whether or not some of those items can be clustered together in an existing goal, or work with the caseworker to create an additional goal to address those needs identified. The other big piece that we want to talk about with case planning is to make sure that the case plan includes strengths. We think about strengths in two different categories. We talk about strengths to use and strengths to build. And strengths to use are those that you use to inform your strengths-based approach. So if you have a child that has athletic ability, you can use that to address social functioning with peers. You can use that, in encouraging a child to join a sports team, something like that, because that gets at the athletic ability and that social functioning with their peers. Strengths, on the other hand, those strengths that are rated as no evidence or a 2 or a 3 on that child's cans. And those are ones that the cans recognizes that there's no strengths that exist in this area, and part of your plan includes developing strengths in this area. So if a youth has no identified career goals or vocational skills, that's a strength to build. So those are things to think about as your caseworkers are presenting their case plans to you.
Okay, we will go ahead and move on to the CAN supervisory approval. So supervisors approve the caseworker's CANs after it is completed and then sent to the supervisor for approval in EWIS-ACWIS. Supervisors should review the CANs results with the caseworker prior to approving it, just to make sure that what is in the CANs is matching up with how the caseworker is describing the child's needs and their strengths, as well as the caregiver's needs and strengths, or the needs and of the identified permanent resource. So there are several required narrative fields in the CANs, as well as a few optional narrative fields. The required fields include the rating of all of the CANs items, so all of those must be rated as 0, 1, 2, or 3 prior to approval. And then the narrative box to document the required exception when a child's level of need exceeds the provider's level of care. The caseworker must document the appropriateness of the placement in these situations, which was just earlier in this webinar. The optional fields or narratives include the notes narrative that is found after each item on the CANs, as well as rating the identified permanent resource. And then the actionable items narrative is also optional. We will go into more details on these fields in the next few slides. And then just to note that a really great resource that is available to everybody is the CANs Quick Reference Guide, which can be found at the link on the screen. Just a great place to look if you're wondering what needs to be approved and how to go about approving it in EWIS-ACWIS. All right, we will go ahead and look at the required narrative. So as we discussed previously, an exception is required when the child's level of need exceeds the provider's level of care. In these instances, the caseworker must document the appropriateness of the placement, such as supports they'll put in place to support the caregiver in the placement, and they would do so within the narrative box that you can see outlined on the screen. This is a required field, and in these situations, the CANs cannot be approved without the completion of this narrative. So in supervision, you would want to be sure to review the narrative to ensure the supports are appropriate to meet the needs of the child, as well as the caregiver, and so that it can sustain the placement. All right, the next place we will look at is the optional narrative. Caseworkers have the option to write a narrative after each item that is on the CANs to document clarifying information regarding the item and its corresponding need or strength. So you can see that circled on the screen right now. That is an optional field. This is a field because it is optional. It's not something that is required to be completed prior to supervisory approval of the CANs. Another one of our optional narratives is under the identified permanent resource. So if there is an identified permanent resource for a child, this tab should be completed for that resource. If there's no identified permanent resource, the tab's not required to be completed. and therefore you wouldn't be seeing this if you are supervisor approving a CANS. You can find this tab, it's highlighted on the screen, but it's found right after the current caregiver tab. And the Identified Permanent Resource tab has the CANS items that are relevant to that identified permanent resource. Just for clarification, an identified permanent resource is the person or persons who are identified in the permanency plan as the child's permanent resource. Just to note, when the assessment type is in-home, the system will default the applicability dropdown as not applicable, that there's no caregiver identified. If the assessment type is in-home, you can go ahead and skip this tab. If it is out of home, the applicability group box is used to determine whether an identified permanent resource is appropriate or not by choosing the appropriate value from the drop-down list, which you can see highlighted on the screen. And then the next optional field is one that you will see once the CANS is completed. It is the actionable items, which can be found on the actionable items tab. As you can see on your screen, this is located just after the identified permanent resource tab. The actionable items tab lists the items from the child or the youth CANS that have a rating of 1, 2, or 3, and the items from the current caregiver and identified permanent resource tabs, which have a rating of a 2 or a 3. So after reviewing the actionable items, the caseworker has the option to use this narrative field to document what actions will be taken and by whom to address the need for the child or the family. Again, at this time, the actionable item narratives are not required. However, agencies must address issues raised in case planning in the case and the permanency plan.
Okay. So now we will move into general supervision of the CANS. And as we've been discussing throughout the webinar, supervisors really need to review CANS results with their caseworkers. We ask that you discuss the needs and the strengths of the child and the family as identified by the worker and goes to the actual scored items on the CANS to ensure that the CANS has been completed thoroughly and correctly. So for instance, if a caseworker is telling you that a child caseload rarely gets a full night's sleep, has nightmares, and isn't falling back asleep, but the sleep item on the CANS is rated a 1, that's a condition that you want to have to ensure those ratings are done correctly and accurately to reflect the needs and strengths of that child. In addition to reviewing the results for a given child and family, there are many questions that supervisors can consider during supervision. We have a handout that you should be seeing on your sheet from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and it's called Creative Applications, and it provides a list of questions for folks in different roles, such as caseworkers and supervisors, regarding the completion of the CANS and the discussion of the CANS once it's completed. So some of the questions listed on there are, as a supervisor, consider whether or not the caseworkers are bringing the CANS to supervision and recommend that they do so that you can review it and have discussions about it. Also, review the caseworker's case plan. Did the caseworker incorporate all those CANS actionable items and usable strengths into the case plan? Caseworker include all the information discussed in supervision in the CANS results, or is there something missing? Is there something that you know is an issue for this child that's not being addressed in that child's CANS? So some additional questions include discussing any placement decisions and permanency goals while reviewing the CANS results. Do the results support the chosen placement and other decisions being made, such as the decisions that we spoke about earlier in the webinar? Review whether or not the caregiver or the identified permanent resource needs more support and resources in order to maintain this placement and to work towards the child's permanency goal. In addition, you can review the CANS history graphs during supervision. You'll hear about those in just a little and how to access those reports. So one question to ask as you're looking through those graphs is, are the CANS ratings remaining the same or are they changing over time? So for example, for the history graphs for the CANS, if those indicate a child continues to rate a 3 on school achievement, but that child is receiving regular tutoring services, you would want to review with your caseworker whether those tutoring services are effective, and perhaps that child needs additional or different services and supports to address that need. You also want to review the CANS results as completed by the current caseworker and compare to previous CANS results completed by previous caseworkers.
All right, now we're going to think about all the different places where we find the CANS and the CANS results in our practice. CAN's results are used. This is including, but it's not limited to confirming safe environments, permanency plans, case plans, and the uniform foster care rates. The CAN's results are used in confirming safe environments to identify any placement danger threats. We discussed this previously, but as a reminder, if a caregiver is rated with an actionable item of a 3 with regard to a specific child, this is considered a placement danger threat, and in these situations, the case to a new placement for the child and ensure the safety of other children in the home. As a supervisor, you should have discussions with your caseworkers regarding any identified placement danger threats and then what the caseworker's corresponding plan will be for those placement danger threats. The CAN's results also feed into case plans, which we did discuss earlier. All the actionable items will be shown, which you can see on your screen right now. And those actionable items must be addressed in the case plan. The ones that must be addressed are marked with an asterisk. You can see that on the screen. Each CAN's actionable item must be addressed in a goal in the case plan, and the case plan cannot be approved unless each actionable item is selected for its corresponding goal. The CAN's results are used in the permanency plan on the planning and services tab, which includes the case plan for the child as described previously. Lastly, the CAN's results feed into the uniform foster care rate to determine the supplemental rate. As a reminder, SACOS will do this automatically for you, so no math is required to figure out what those supplemental rates are going to be. All right, we will go ahead and turn it over to Janelle to talk about reports, dashboards, and CAN's history.
So there are a number of different reports and dashboards that are available for people to use. And it's come to our attention as we've done these webcasts and gone around to provide technical assistance to agency staff that people are not aware of all of these that are available to them, which can help improve timeliness of the CAN, your work and engagement with children and their families. So as a supervisor, you have several resources available. One, that your staff are getting the CAN's completed timeliness, which also, impacts your ability to do many other pieces of work that are attached to it, as you've seen. So the timeliness report, as you can see on your screen right now, this is generated through EW reports, and it allows you to see the time frame for the CANs completed by the caseworkers on your team. So you can sort this by worker, you can sort this by placement type, all sorts of things to see whether or not, who's coming due for their CANs, who's overdue, and you can see sort of how that is working in the approval process as well. Second, in the Geographic Placement Resource System, otherwise known as JEPRS, the information from the CANs is loaded into this, and this system allows agencies to search for providers based on the geographic location, and soon will include the CAN's level of need of the providers. So level of need of the providers is already in, but what you'll be able to do is search on this child-specific CAN's items in conjunction with the provider's level of need. So right now you can go on and search for a specific kid or a specific provider type. So you can look for level 3 homes, group homes, RCCs, and it won't limit you to just the child's CANs. But you will be able to look in the future at specific types of items on the CANs and which providers can successfully care for those kids. Additionally, the dashboard for performance-based measures includes some of the CANs related items for agencies to be able to make decisions about placement with private agency providers. This allows you to see what types of children they're actually caring for. Take sort of the general, what you think you know about each of the agencies and who they serve. You actually can go and search in their actual information of who they've served in the last year and see by domain where they fare versus other like similar agencies. So child placing agencies, for instance, you can see how that agency scores in conjunction to other similar agencies. And you can also drill into this information and see specific item level information as well. The next one shows the EWISAQUA's CANS history information. So there are a few pages in EWISAQUA's to view the CANS history for a child. The history of CANS results page allows you to see all the CANS for a child. Additionally, CANS results are viewable in the graphs. So these results can be reviewed by the child's assessed level of need, the total CANS rating, or each individual CANS module. I gotta redo this one. Here you will see some of the different areas in EWISAQUA's where you can see and view the CANS history. So there are a few pages in View the CANS history for a child. The history of CANS results page allows you to see all CANS for a child. Additionally, CANS results are viewable in graphs. These results can be viewed by the child's assessed level of need, the total CANS rating, or each individual CANS module. The information for these graphs can be viewed by different time frames, so you can use all the CANS, those completed for the current out-of-home care placement episode, those completed for the current out-of-home placement, or those that exist in a custom time frame, so you can pick and choose the ones that you want to have shown. These reports and graphs are found by clicking on the history of the CANS results on the Results tab of the child's CANS page. The history of the CANS results page is used to show all CANS for a child, which includes approved in-home and out-of-home care assessments, as well as to search history of particular CANS items. To print the history of the CANS results, see the History of the CANS Results group box on the bottom of the page. Click the Print History button. To search the history of a particular CANS result, select an option from the time. Options include all, current out-of-home episode, current out-of-home placement, and custom. Again, you can select any applicable items from the View History Of section, or you can click Select All, and it will automatically have all of them come in. And then you need to click the Submit button. Based on the items that are selected in the View History Of section, the graphs will change to only see the associated strengths and needs in the time frame selected. Once you select the Submit button, the history of the CANS page will display. Depending on the criteria that were selected, you will see one or more graphs. And these can be used in discussions with children and their families, with teams, to show progress or areas where you still need to, provide different efforts on. I just want to re-emphasize for supervisors that you really are that final level for your workers in terms of making sure that the CANs are accurate that they're doing. So if they're telling you something in supervision or when they're staffing the case with you and you do not see that reflective in the CANs items and the different areas in which you're approving related pieces of work, you need to have discussions with your workers about their scoring. Is something off in their scoring? Does it seem like they're just doing it to go through the motions? What is sort of going on with the scoring patterns? And if there's ever a case where you have a worker who needs particular attention in terms of additional support or maybe some technical equipment, is always willing to provide that. So our contact information you'll see at the end of this slide. She or he can contact any one of the three of us that are named on there, and we can provide specific technical assistance around scoring to an individual. If there's a question about whether it should be a 0, 1, 2, or 3, we're more than willing to talk through those type of scenarios with people. But I do think supervisors provide that valuable oversight of the system and what your workers are doing, and this information is being used in multiple ways now, and it's really beneficial for everyone if that information as possible.